Now, let's start today's forum, International Disaster Reduction Alliance Forum, DRA Forum 2022, Disaster Information, Evacuation Behaviors, and Adaptation to Global Warming. For this forum to be broadly broadcast to the world, we have not only in Japanese, but also in English through YouTube live streaming. I am the Master of Ceremony today. I am the PR specialist of Hyogo Prefecture. My name is Naomi Shimezu. Nice to meet you. From the organizer, we'd like to hear from Mr. Makoto Iokibe, Chairperson, Disaster Reduction Alliance, and President of Hyogo Earthquake Memorial 21st Century Institute. Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Iokibe. On behalf of the organizer, let me talk about this. Today, this is the DRA Forum 2022. Thank you very much for your watching this forum. Under the COVID-19 that's spreading a lot, we had to stop holding this event on site, but online. And then this is available in Japanese and English languages through YouTube. We believe that more and more people are able to participate in a different way. So what is DRA? In 1995, as you know, there was an earthquake in the Hanshin Awaji area. I was a professor at Kobe University back then. Mori Wataru, who is a similar student of mine, was killed, and 39 people were killed, and more than 6,400 people were killed in this earthquake. It was a huge shock. Is Japanese city that weak or vulnerable? Of course, natural disaster is very tough. We were almost dead in a sense, so we had to do something. That's what I thought. For the nationals and citizens that will support our future, Japan needs to be stronger and more robust. That's why DRA was founded. We talk about creative reconstruction and recovery as a slogan. We want to develop people and a business that will really help our future. And then the biggest pillar is disaster-related activities. In the eastern part of Kobe, we created a new town where we have the reconstruction houses, shopping towns, and cinemas, and other facilities, including Disaster and Renovation Institute, or DRI, that will help us protect our lives from future disasters through research activities. JICA, that is a Japan International Cooperation Agency, that also helps us. We have a lot of environmental and health-related institutions that are concentrated in the eastern part of Kobe City, including 19 facilities and institutions, both domestic and institutions, that is summarized into DRA. From 2003, we started our activity, so this is our 20th anniversary. As international society grapple with the problems related to industry especially, we would like to have more lively discussion through this forum, and now we're in the 20th anniversary. Earthquake and ground shaking incidents are increasing in frequency, and along with the global warming, we have new types of natural disasters. That's where we are in now. And we have a lot of torrential rain caused by a linear rain band that causes a lot of damage to us every year. Based on that situation, our theme here is the disaster information, warning advisory, and evacuation behaviors, adaptation to global warming. This is our theme today. We have two keynote speakers today. After that, we'll have a panel discussion. How do we better respond to a disaster-related environment? Let's think about that together with this opportunity. So the first keynote speaker is from Kyoto University Disaster Research Institute, the head of the facility, Mr. Nakakita. He will talk about the disasters and its impact. And from the United States, we have FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, Mr. Brandon Bolinsky, who will talk about the situation in the US and the disaster response, disaster information, especially the lessons from the hurricanes in the country, as well as how to evacuate better. He will give us a very state-of-the-art insights from the country. So after these two keynote speakers, Mr. Kawata, Director Executive of DRI Institute, who will lead the panel discussion that follows. From the United States, as I mentioned, Mr. Bolinsky will be there, and we have a total of 3 speakers from FEMA that will join the panel discussion. Disaster reduction, prevention, and evacuation behaviors will be really deeply discussed in this panel discussion, I hope. I believe that this forum will help us better respond to the environmental crisis and climate change as an indication of what we should be doing going forward. And hopefully this forum will be a guiding help for you. That concludes my speech. Thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy until the end of the forum. Thank you. Thank you so much. Now, we'd like to hear from the governor of Hyogo Prefecture, Mr. Motohiko Saito. Governor Saito has given us a video message. Please look at the screen.
I am Motohiko Saito, Governor of Kyogo Prefecture. The International Disaster Reduction Alliance Forum, on the opening of the event, let me say a few words. This forum is because of the expansion of the COVID-19 is held online only. Thank you very much for the great effort to organize this event today. And today's theme is disaster information, warning and advisory, and evacuation behaviors, adaptation to global warming. Well, nearly 6,400 people were killed in the Great Hanshin earthquake. And on January 17th marked the 27th anniversary of the event, of the disaster. And even in Hyogo Prefecture, the number of people who haven't experienced disaster by themselves have increased. But Nankai Trough earthquake expected to come, and we have the more and more severe water disasters. So to clear the timing of the evacuation and to deliver the disaster-related information to the residents is very important to protect their lives. In Hyogo Prefecture, every one of the residents beforehand of the disaster has the My Evacuation card with which they can confirm where to go and when. And they have the disaster prevention network, and the government is asking the people to download the application. And under the COVID-19, the complicated disaster with the pandemic is another new issue we have to face. So to prevent the cluster at the evacuation center is necessary. And there is a case that residents do not evacuate because they fear the pandemic and the evacuation center, which resulted in another type of disaster. So the Hyogo Prefecture established the evacuation center operation guideline. And for the residents of the prefecture, the municipalities designate the evacuation centers for emergency. But in addition to these centers, when the safety can be confirmed, residents can choose to stay at home or to the other destinations. So we are asking people to consider the various options as evacuation destination. When there is an urgent disaster, you are the only one who can surely protect yourself. So through the discussion at today's forum, the various wisdoms and experiences will be shared, and I hope that the more proper advice can be given to the people. And we expect that network of the people in the field of the disaster prevention will expand and will result in accelerated action to prevent disasters. And lastly, I'd like to wish for the success of this forum and the better development of all the attendees today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now we will hear from Mr. Takeo Murakami, Counselor of Cabinet Office. Mr. Murakami will be joining from Zoom. Dear Chairperson Iokibe, Governor Sato, and all the participants, let me make a opening remark and a greeting as we start today's DRA Forum 2022. COVID-19 has been spreading globally and changed the world for 2 years now. We need to continue to get over this humanitarian crisis and at the same time maintain social and economic activities. But then last year, the world saw a number of disasters. In the US, California had a historic fire incident, Hurricane Ida in August, and tornado in the middle of country in December. In many cases, it was a year full of disasters. And Germany had flooding, Haiti had earthquake, and Indonesia had a volcano eruption. Also, on January 15th, in the Tonga coast, there was a submarine volcano eruption that caused tsunami to countries along the Pacific, as well as making it impossible for Tonga to telecommunicate. We're only learning about the current status of the damage, but international community has to continue to support. Here in Japan, last year from July to August, torrential rains continued, causing a number of casualties, especially in Atami City in Shizuoka Prefecture. The town areas were, in a sense, cracked through large-scale debris flow, killing 26 people and 1 person still missing. Throughout Japan and throughout the world, we'd like to extend our heartfelt condolences to those who have lost their lives. So, it's been a pleasure for us to be able to hold this RDA forum this year as well. It's been held online for the past 2 years, but both Japan and the US across the Pacific are able to join together to have a very deep discussion, which is very meaningful. Under the new normal, this is a new way of holding international symposiums. And today's theme of the forum is about disaster information, warning advisory, evacuation behaviors, adaptation to global warming. This is our common challenge that the world faces. And we had a number of torrential rains in Japan for the past several years. We need to learn the lessons and take a lot of measures to prevent the recurrence. And especially last year, Basic Acts on Disaster Management was revised. Advisory of evacuation and instruction were integrated to make it more easier for people to understand the information. And people who are old and disabled are better supported through individual evacuation plan. This is a plan now made compulsory for municipalities to make efforts. Under the COVID-19, we need to be able to properly evacuate. The government is trying its best to open evacuation shelters so people and their friends and families can evacuate. They are also informing on shelters hygiene and its setup and peacetime preparation and disaster response. Guidelines and notifications are also given to local governments in order to support a proper issuance of evacuation orders. We hold trainings to the local communities as well as dispatch weather experts. But on the other hand, the most important thing is for the residents to protect their lives by themselves and act proactively. In order for that to happen, disaster prevention education, drills, and local disaster prevention plans will have to be created and conducted so that we can raise the disaster prevention awareness and evacuate through actions. This is a nurturing of the disaster prevention culture we need to develop. In today's forum, we'll have experts on Japan's disaster information and evacuation behavior from Japan, and leaders from the US FEMA, who will give us lectures and discussions. Through this forum, we hope to gain more understanding about the disaster information and evacuation between these two countries and deepen our insight on that. Lastly but not least, Hyogo Prefecture Office, DRI, and DRA, and all the people who have contributed to the holding of this forum. I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to everyone, as well as the future success for all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Those who are watching the YouTube streaming, we are sorry for the kind of loss of connection during the course of the event. Now, we'd like to go into the keynote lecture 1, the impacts of climate change in water disasters and adaptation, by Professor Eiichi Nakakita, the Director of Disaster Prevention Research Center of Institute of Kyoto University. And as for the background of Professor Nakakita, please refer to the program for today's event. Now, Professor Nakakita, microphone is yours. Thank you very much for your introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Eiichi Nakakita from Disaster Prevention Research Institute of Kyoto University. And so I am very honored to have this opportunity to work with the DRA and the DRI. And I would like to talk about the global warming, especially about its impact on the water disaster. And as you can see on the slide, under the Disaster Prevention Research Institute, we have the collaborative research unit under this institute. And like Professor Yamori and other people together, we are thinking about the climate change together with it is. So let me start my keynote lecture. So these are the contents of my lecture today. So first, the global warming impact are seen everywhere. As you see here, in the past 10 years, there are the various disasters such as the high tide, surge, and water disasters, especially after 2017 of the Kyushu north part of torrential rain, or western part of Japan rain, or high tide, which hit Rokko Island, and also Typhoon 19 in 2019. And 2 years ago, in 2020, in Kumamoto, there was a torrential rain in Kumamoto Prefecture. And I mention these events because the impact of the global warming are reflected in these disasters, and it was scientifically proved. So now we have to say we are in a world with the impact of the global warming. So first, I have to say that the impact of the global warming is now being seen. And it is, yes, there's no doubt that the impact of the global warming is seen everywhere. And in occasion of the torrential rain in the western part of Japan, when I appeared at the TV program that is this torrential rain caused by the global warming? I said yes, and the master of ceremony of the program was surprised because at that time, not many people talked that the global warming has a direct impact on the torrential rain. But I think we can say yes for that. And as for the torrential rain, an experienced level of disaster takes place every year. And now the rainfall is heavier than ever before. And also the total rainfall is much larger than before. And also to the north and east part of Japan is now having the torrential rains, which it didn't have in the past. So what we have to do is the title of this today's forum, that is to adapt to the climate change or global warming. And we have to start it right now. That is a message from me today, so that we will not have to get regret in the future. So we have to do it right now. And the basis of that is the scientific prediction of the future. So far, the flood control has been planned based on the accumulation of data from the past, but it does not work from now anymore. So into the future, the scientific prediction is a trustworthy one. So the flood control plan is now being revised with these predictions. For example, the Kumano River in Kinki region, Wakasegawa in Miyazaki Prefecture, and Kumagawa, which flooded 2 years ago. The target of the flood control has been revised. So now as for the level of the torrential rain, 1.1 times heavier rain is now expected. And after the maize restoration, the flood control target is to stop the overflow. But under the current situation, that overflow cannot be prevented. So with that as a kind of precondition, we have to conduct another type of flood control by the upstream, middle stream, and downstream of the basin. And all the residents and also local governments have to work together in controlling the flood. So this is the so first paradigm shift is the to have the new target, and second is to second paradigm shift is to involve everyone in the basin, and also we have to think about time access. So global warming takes place little by little, but in after 5 years or 10 years, we'll be surprised to see how much global warming we now face. So we have to look into the future and have to see the current situation and make the plan into the future. And we have to do it right now so that we can catch up with the change of the climate. And as you can see at the bottom, so into the future, we have to make the prediction and we have to learn lesson from the past experiences. And we also have to take the lesson from the wisdom of the past before the maize restoration, like the Kasumi word. So the guide the flood to the rice paddies so that it would not directly hit the residential areas. So we have to utilize such lessons from the past. And lastly, academically, the areas we haven't worked on so far have to be addressed. So not the normal measures, because this is for the adaptation, we have to make a kind of jump in adapting. And from the bottom up style, we have to entertain various opinions and wisdoms. And that kind of activity is very important. And this is the IPCC Assessment Report 6, which was just recently released. So heat wave. So the coloring means that there is an impact of the global warming. And this is about the torrential rain or heavy precipitation. This kind of report was now issued. So you can see the beginning of the impact of the global warming in climate. And the horizontal axis is years, and vertical axis is for the rise of the temperature. And 2008 is set as the current year, but 2022 is actually the current year. And so 4 degrees increase from now to the red zone, or 2 degrees increase, or as was discussed in the COP, we can contain the increase to less than 1.5 degrees. So what is important is to that, even if we can go to the 2-year increase range with the cut of the carbon emission, that is not the end of the century. So you may think that the 2 degrees Celsius rise of temperature is the end of the world, but that's not the case. We have to look into 20 years from now or 30 years from now, in the generation of our children or grandchildren, this kind of situation can happen. And this is the role of the mitigation and adaptation. So the right side is a horizontal line is the time, and the vertical axis is the disaster level. So after the war, Japan was hit by the war, and the land was devastated, and that land was hit by typhoon, and many people lost their lives. And this Disaster Prevention Research Institute of Kyoto University celebrates 70 years anniversary this year, and this institute was established to answer to that kind of situation. So more scientific target was set for the flood control now. So this broken line on the horizontal broken line, now we are trying to adapt to that flood control target. So the meaning of the mitigation and adaptation. So the power of the climate change, which is expressed in red line, is rising, but with the power of mitigation, we're trying to lower that line. But even with that lower line, we still have the impact of the climate change. And now the temperature of this ocean water is rising. So even with the mitigation having effect on the atmosphere, we may continue to have the impact from the ocean temperature rise. So with the mitigation, we may contain the temperature rise at 2 degrees Celsius, and you may think that is enough, but we have to see that beyond that point, that is to adapt to that change. That is a mission of, that is the necessary for us. So we have to take the balance between mitigation and adaptation. And of course, mitigation itself is a good adaptation. So how much mitigation we can have or how much contain we can achieve with the temperature rise is important. But even after the successful mitigation, we have to think about the mitigation. So we can raise this line farther up. And in that sense, in case of the adaptation, of course, the infrastructure strengthening is important, such as the construction of the dam and so on. It is necessary, but in addition to that, we have to see the reaction or action by all the people living on the basin, and how much measure we can take against the global warming. And because the conventional evacuation center will not work anymore, so we have to think about the evacuation route too. This is a message from this slide. And at the same time, we have to be prepared against the large scale, largest one in every 100-year type disaster, such as flood and torrential rains. And each prefecture is expected to come up with the prediction for each area. But so far, no concrete plan is made, so we have to work on that. So as for the flood control, there are two paradigm shifts. One is to change the target of the flood control based on the scientific climate change prediction. That is the first paradigm shift. And this is the word by the Ministry of MLIT, that is the second paradigm shift, that we have to control the flood, even with the overflow from the rivers. So we have to make a kind of jump in the adaptation measures. And this is the most important point for my lecture. And I'd like to explain you various situations so far. So what is a scientific prediction of the climate change? I have the background in the civil engineering, and at the same time, I have been working on the torrential rain predictions and so on. And there is a community of the climatologists and also the academia for the disaster prevention. And the tie-up between these are very important. So in the past 15 years, these have been collaborating. And of course, from 10 years ago, about the flood control related ministries, such as the MLIT, we share information with them on a daily basis and have a discussion with them. So the target of the flood control itself has been devised now. So the scientific program under the ministry are next are being promoted. And since 22, the Kyosei program was started using the supercomputer Fugaku, and Japanese style prediction was created to contribute to the world. And since 2007, Hakushin program has started, which can be used for the prediction of the climate change in Japan. And in the past 15 years, as for the hazard, the Disaster Prevention Research Institute and the 15 to 20 institutes throughout the nation, about 100 researchers involved in this. And in this program, as you can see here on the left top, the global climate model was established, and also in the left and bottom, by 2007, the research is being done that there is a loss of the ice in the Greenland, and also in the middle, the regional climate model around Japan was created. And on the very right, you can see my face as the Disaster Prevention Research Institute. We are working on the hazard research. So from now, the climatologist group and Academia for Climate Change Assessment and Adaptation group will collaborating, and I'll explain you what collaboration we have. And what information we use for that research is that with the projection of the climate, like the weather focused on daily basis, you can find the such change predicted. So in the case that the temperature rise by 4 degrees or 2 degrees, then you can find the computer simulation. And as you see here, at the end of the century, you can see how many typhoons will be generated and how many of them will come to Japan, and how the change takes place with the centric pressure. So such climatic information can be produced from the simulation. So the weather is the daily weather condition, and weather focus. If the weather focus was 2070, it would not work. But that is a kind of information enough to make the prediction into the future. And near Japan, we have the linear rain band, which brings the torrential rain. And what impact it will have in Japan, near Japan? So we can have the more finer mesh to come up with the more finer simulation about the situation near Japan, like the torrential rain in Toba River in 2008. And we can reproduce the movement of the crowds in that case, in that each disaster. So, and according to that prediction, as for typhoon, the number approaching Japan will decrease, but the temperature of the ocean water will rise. So at the bottom of the, it will evaporate more easily. And so there'll be more vapor in atmosphere, and with higher temperature. And that evaporation serves as an energy to create the thunder cloud. So even in the future, with the other stabilized atmospheric movement, with the rise of temperature of the ocean and the more moisture in the air, the typhoon will be severe or more powerful. And as for the Asia monsoon-related heavy rainfall, as you may know, in the beginning of July, you have much rain in the beginning of July, especially in the Kyushu area. We wish that there will be any more torrential rain, but every year now we see the torrential rain in the beginning of the July. That matches what we predict in the simulation. And also the total rainfall per torrential rain can be predicted, and also the area affected by the torrential rain is now moving eastward. And also the localized rainfall that is caused by the vapor or moisture coming from the Ki-Suido, which hits the Mount Rokko and produces cloud. So the frequency of the torrential rain will increase. And as a result, what happens, what is expected to happen here. So there will be an increase in once in 100 years maximum river discharge all over Japan can be seen. And also increase in once in 10 years river discharge in many watersheds, except in northern part and the central mountain areas of Japan. And because of the rise of temperature, snow will melt. So beginning of the spring will not have much snowfall, which resulted in the shortage of water, which requires a paradigm shift in the operation of the agriculture. And now there's a, in the case of the heavy winter fall, the strongest snow producing cloud can be stronger production of the cloud can be expected. So in case that we have the snowfall, that snowfall much heavier than we have now, and especially in the Niigata area or Tottori area where there's much snowfall, they may have the much severe or heavier snowfall from now.
Let me give you some information about seasonal raining. As you can see, this one, Awaji Island and the Osaka Bay and Mountain Rocco are shown here. And you can see the time below. And after 11 p.m., you see the cumulonimbus clouds that are coming out one after another. So this means the linear rain band that is caused by the linear convective system. So you see the baby clouds that are growing to be the student, or and at the same time you see the baby clouds that always gives rainfall. That is the Fukuchiyama's torrential rain in Kyushu, northern part of Kyushu, or Hiroshima. Those are the torrential rains that you saw. It's so frequent that now it's coming out as a mudslide. So this is a complicated disaster now. We have flooding and mudslides as disasters that will have to be considered more going forward. That's why it's focused more. You can see this is a future forecast from the rain radar. This is 2084. Yes. So what is the rain front going to look like? So using this kind of information, we see how does the seasonal rain, torrential rain will happen, and how does it affect. We can see that. As you can see here, this is in the 2080s. This is not a weather forecast, so you have X in here. So just try to imagine the weather. And this is July timing. So we have more rains in the beginning of the month. This is the 2 or 3 decades forecast. We have different forecasts. So we'll see if more rains will be coming out or not. So this is a rain front that will also continue to exist at the end of this century. And it's going up and up in the archipelago. So that's the situation simulated in here. This one is 6 degrees rise. And in this century, we'll have a lot of seasonal torrential rain that also happens at the north part of Japan, Hokkaido. In Tohoku area, there will also be more. That's on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, this shows a computer's meteorological equation used to simulate the current status. I mean, the early 2000s is the timing we simulated. Hokkaido or Tohoku areas, we do not have much torrential rain there as of now. So this is the next one. So the top two are the current simulations. So I gave you two diagrams. We wanted to give you like 3,000 dots, but that's how the research is going on. But we have just two diagrams in here, and we have 4 scenarios as of the end of this century. So if we do these 4 scenarios, then in the western part of Japan, of course, seasonal torrential rain will increase, and Kanto around Tokyo, Tohoku, and Hokkaido areas will have more torrential rains, which is consistent in the 4 diagrams in here. And then I will just skip here, but this is also about the forecast. You have the red and blue graphs. Red is about the 4 degrees rise simulation, and at the beginning of July, we have more seasonal torrential rain, which was already forecast, and say like, oh, this is a recent trend. And we say like, oh, this agrees. So that shows the high probability of global warming we have some analysis method for global warming. I'm not going to get into details, but it doesn't contradict with the future forecast, at least. Then, let me talk about typhoons. It's getting scarier and scarier. That was 2013 that these photos are taken. That was a typhoon number 18 that ravaged Kinki area. And in Kyoto, we almost had a really big flooding. Lake Biwa had a really almost 100% water stored there, and we were able to really prevent the overflowing. So it was really coming close to the rupture of the dam. We were saved. But this also shows the impact of global warming, in my opinion. It's not scientifically proven, but we want to prove it scientifically. Then we have some difficult graphs in here, but my point is this. For example, Yodoga River, the flood control is shown on the left-hand side. We try to protect Osaka or downstream. It's like the rainfall in 200 years is the standard we try to protect people against. And then how many years ahead? And we're saying on average 200 years ahead. That's the target. And then how many years as of now? Right now, we're looking at 900 years. So 200 every 200 years under 4 degrees scenario, that's one thing. But then converted to the current time, that's 900 years ahead. So that's the how rare or how difficult it is to really simulate and protect ourselves against. So we also did the simulation against 5,000 years. So we said we would do this physical analysis, and we said like 4 Celsius degrees rise for 200 years. Or so if we do forecast this way, we'll be more accurate in the way of forecasting. Okay. Typhoon number 19 ravaged Kanto and Tohoku area. And as you can see here, more than 100 banks were ruptured. You see the crosses. These are the rivers that erupted. And on the graphs, you can see vertically, let me take a look, which one shows which. Yeah, this one's rainfall. The planned rainfall is in blue. Basically, it was overflown or equivalent to the plan. So when we check the global warming impact, it's not only about the simulations for the future, but also the simulation of the past. For example, typhoon number 19 happened, and then on the right-hand side, and we removed the temperature rise since the 1980s. So we have simulated with that scenario. Or on the next page, you see on the right that this is the 4 degrees rise at the end of the century. Then what would have happened would happen. So these are the simulations now we're able to do. At the left-hand side, in both pages, are the current simulations about the damage of typhoon number 19. In Chikumagawa River, there was a flooding, or people died, or the trains were stopped. But if we remove the temperature rise since 1980s, then the banks wouldn't have been overflown. And at the same time, this is a 4 degrees rise. What happens in here? Well, you see the colors. The redder, the more overflown. We see more reds in here. And as a result, what do we learn? Well, for example, in Tokyo, large rivers, including Arakawa River, means that 3 million people in Kotoku ward have to evacuate. And then on the left-hand side, this is a current target for flood control, which is in a dark blue. And then what actually happens is this one, the brown one, the third from the left. Next to that is a green, is a simulation of non-global warming, and yellow is for the 2 degrees rise and 4 degrees rise in red. So these are the world's simulations. As you can see here, 2 degrees rise and a 4 degrees rise. will mean that the current flood control targets are overflown or exceeded. Already global warming is included in the simulation in the brown and light blue and green bars. You can see those differences in here. In the previous page, we have already said that Chikumagawa River, under the 2 degrees rise, the current target is exceeded. So we can see a lot of things in Japan. By checking all of these, we're coming up to the forecast for the future by changing our targets for the flood control. So, so the next one is a high tide in Rokko Island in Japan, in Kobe City, and Osaka's floodgate protected people in Osaka. Sorry, I'm trying to play this video here. Yes, on the right. So you see a 3 meters difference between the left and right. And it did protect Osaka City. And it's been 60 years old. And after 60 years, it started to work. This is a very good example of a civil engineering work. It's, it's been already finished, the designing, I think. It's getting aged already. So for the next 60 to 80 years, of the floodgate, Osaka City is now planning that for the future. And then if it's 60 years from now, it's going to be almost at the end of the century. So we need to think about even like 2 degrees rise from the current time. So in order to create the foundation of the floodgate, this considers the century end simulation, which means a large flood. For floodgates, like 2 degrees, and if we need to go for 4 degrees, then we need to consider that as well. So we need to be adaptive, which will be very, very important. And as shown in this good example here. Sorry, am I running out of time? Okay, anyway, so high tide under the 4 degrees high, that's what's happening in here.
So the change takes place little by little. So as we do with the design of the flood gate, we have to look into the future and be prepared and have plan. So let me skip these slides. So how the change takes place little by little has to be monitored. And lastly, I'd like to talk about the importance of the collaboration with the relevant ministries and agencies. And our program uh, has the collaboration more than 15 years with the water alert adaptation for the disaster and water alert adaptation. And we also have the other ministries involved, such as the Ministry of Agriculture, Forest and Fishery. And as you can see here, with the climate change as a kind of precondition, we have established various committees and meetings. And they are working on the revise of the plan and also the measures of the water basin control and management. And this is my last important message from me. So as I mentioned earlier, from the past to the future, and also about the external pressure. In the past, the infrastructure development is the target of the flood control. But because of the climate change, now the target of the infrastructure development has been rising to deal with the once every 200 years disaster. But in order to deal with the one which takes place once every 200 years, we have to raise it further to the green line. And this is what I mean by the increasing of the disaster prevention capacity, and also the adaptation and the construction uh, are important in a message by the Ministry of Environment, Koizumi. So we have to think about the construction when we think about the adaptation. And as was mentioned by Kawata sensei, so we have to have the plan and taking the time also into consideration. So we have to have the clear time frame in establishing the plan. So this will be a kind of external power of more than 1,000 years of time span, and we have to make the plan for that. And for the other one, infrastructure alone cannot work with that. And so we have to have the establish the plan, and we have to think about quantifying how much measure can be taken to deal with the severe disaster. And we are asked to come up with a plan taking the time frame into consideration. And this is my last page of the material. So my conclusion is that this is the very last page. So the climate-related disasters have become more severe, and the impact of the climate change has to be more accurately evaluated, and scientific research is now being done. And now they are used to come up with the adaptation measures. And the change of the climate change risk and speed have to be paid attention to. And of course, the prediction itself has some uncertainties, but in order to have the adaptation without regret, we have to utilize the precautionary principle. So the lack of the scientific evidence or information should not be the reason for people not to take reaction. And bottom-up approach is very important, and action without delay is imperative. And the bottom-up approaches based on the local realities are essential. So national level alone, the various adaptation cannot be possible. So at the national level, the collaboration among the relevant parties have to be strengthened. So the collaboration between the academia and disaster prevention regions have to be promoted. So Japanese government has to raise the water protection standard and made a transition to the river basin disaster resilience and sustainability by all. Thank you very much. That's all from me. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. Next, I'd like to go into keynote lecture 2, evacuation from hurricanes. The lecturer is Mr. Brandon Bolinsky, Federal Emergency Management Agency. And Mr. Bolinsky is going to take part in the panel discussion online later. And here I'd like to show you the pre-recorded keynote lecture by Mr. Bolinsky. So please enjoy the video.
Well, hi, my name is Brandon Belinsky. I'm with the Federal Emergency Management Agency, in particular Region 4 in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm the Hurricane Program Manager and GIS Manager for the region. I'm here to talk a little bit about evacuations from hurricanes, the federal support we provide, some of the best practices and examples of successful cases. First off, I want to thank you for the invitation and the interest in our programs. It's a great honor, and just happy to share what we've learned and where we've had some successes and where we've learned from some challenging times. A little bit about the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Our mission is really simple, but it's really important: helping people before, during, and after disasters. It takes a lot of people to do it across the nation, and a lot of hardworking folks that are working day in and out. I'm sure you're aware of that. But some of the key things we do are supporting our states and tribes through our disasters during response and recovery in any way we can, and trying to be there for them through resources, capabilities, people. Also preparedness in the forms of training, planning, and exercises, and administration of preparedness and mitigation grants, and also reducing risk through mitigation programs. A lot going on. Some of our key mission essential functions that we must do, we have to be ready to do it and at a moment's notice, is we are the lead federal agency for response, recovery, and the continuity of the federal executive branch. Those response efforts during major disasters are so critical that the right capabilities, the right people are there, and to support the states. And the recovery efforts following disaster, getting communities back on their feet, back to where they need to be, so that they can be thriving and supporting their communities. And then last, the coordinating the federal executive branch continuity plans and programs, making sure that our governments are running and that we can provide all those services that we provide no matter what. A little bit about FEMA Region 4, the way it's organized here in the United States. We federally support our disasters. They're state managed and locally executed. So the FEMA is not doing every single thing all the way down to giving someone a meal. They're supporting those states. The states are managing those resources and the locals are executing them. In FEMA Region 4 in the Southeast region, we have a population of over 66 million people, a lot of folks. We have 8 states and 6 federally recognized tribes, over 400,000 square miles of area to cover, with 2,000 miles of coastline, quite a bit. Unfortunately, where we sit in the Southeast, we have a lot of risks, including hurricanes, tornadoes, flooding, drought, ice storms, earthquakes, fires. Sometimes a lot happen all at the same time. But the biggest risk, the one that can have multiple states impacted, that will cause us to have multi-prong approaches and responses, are hurricanes. And 6 of our states are right in the path, have coastlines from hurricanes. But our other states, even to the north, can still feel the impact. So everybody is hurricane threatened in our region. As you all know, and probably a lot of folks know, hurricanes are devastating. We've seen it time and time again that these storms can change communities for the worse many times and for a long time. Storm surge is the incredible force that can really change these communities where the coastline usually is breaking somewhere totally different. And the power of water is just amazing. Unfortunately, sometimes what is left from the water, the winds could take. A lot of times we think about, if you can survive the water, if you can raise up high enough, you'll be okay. But the winds can take out communications. It can cause debris issues. And a lot of that area just won't be inhabitable. And it's tough to imagine that we have these communities that we've taken years to build and put so much thought and effort into, but it really will be left uninhabitable. The services that make it living comfortable will not be there. And we know that hurricanes can change that. And it takes many years to recover, not just days, not just months, many years for these communities to recover fully to get back to where they were before. A little bit about the National Hurricane Program within FEMA and other federal agencies. We realize it is an important role to make sure that our communities are prepared from these hurricanes and what they can do to them. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to move people out away from the water and those beautiful beaches. So we have a lot of folks putting a lot of effort into planning for hurricanes between FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and their planning expertise, and the National Hurricane Center with NOAA. With those agencies, we take the expertise from each one of those and filter it to the states. Through FEMA, we're trying to administer this program throughout all of the nation, making sure the right doctrine and methodology is being followed, and help training for the hurricanes and decision makers. The Corps of Engineers helps us with those studies, helps us with personnel and training and understanding what happened after the storms. And the Hurricane Center, the expertise on the weather side is just invaluable. They do storm surge modeling to help supporting, and we also have a hurricane liaison team that works with them day in and day out. They're giving that direct support straight to the state emergency management agencies, and the states are giving their priorities and helping us with local coordination and filtering it down to the local emergency managers that have those operational priorities and can do that local coordination with local agencies and local personnel to support. On the operational side, when the hurricanes are out there and we have to respond to them, the same people are involved. And it really comes full circle when the National Hurricane Center is putting out those forecasts for the hurricanes, the hurricane liaison team, FEMA team that deploys to the Hurricane Center to support that rapid communications to give the federal partners the right analysis and decision support to then support those states in their efforts, sending the right amount of people and the capabilities needed to support the response and possible recovery from hurricanes. And the states have that direct management of those resources to help with that assistance and decision support that goes further down to those local emergency managers and who are in charge of those evacuation decisions ultimately. Obviously, that doesn't happen that ultimate decision doesn't happen when a hurricane's coming. The National Hurricane Program, some of our key products and services that we have, obviously the forecasts from the Hurricane Center and the storm surge modeling. Understanding those hurricanes is just so key to get the next steps right. And they are some of the best in the world. Forecasters are getting better and better, and we sometimes take for granted how good they are. But by taking those products and having concerted studies, hurricane evacuation studies, we can put that together to give our state and county counterparts a decision support tool called HURVAC that blends those all together, taking the products, taking storm surge and these evacuation studies, which I'll talk about shortly, and gets it to the people that need to make those decisions. That we also provide operational support through the Hurricane Liaison Team and other response agents that are out there and deployed to the field, and also planning the support that is provided through the evacuation studies, and then training. This is a lot of information to get and digest, and the training part is really key. One, it helps establish some of those priorities, and two, making sure people understand when we give them these large studies, they know what they're getting into, so they can make informed decisions and informed planning decisions. So how do we measure risk from hurricanes? Storm surge is the big one, as I mentioned, and this is what is moving people. It has the largest potential for fatalities and loss of property in the end. This is why people need to leave. And it's hard for people to understand that because it doesn't happen very often. We can successfully model it for our communities though. We know where the storm surge will go. We know how deep the water will be for specific storms, and we know which communities are vulnerable to that. Those storm surge modeling efforts are the basis for evacuation zones and evacuation studies. And those studies provide the key information and planning. Those studies can give them specific numbers of people and things and roads that are in the way to understand sheltering and timing of all of these things. This information has to happen well in advance, obviously. Writing a plan shouldn't be happening when a storm's coming at you. It happens continuously right now. So that information is always being worked on through the National Hurricane Program and its partners to get to the people that need to have that information to plan. A little bit on evacuation studies. It is a standard process for understanding the threat from hurricanes. We have a 5-step process that we go through in understanding the storm surge, understanding the vulnerabilities, where are the shelters and what does the sheltering need? What are the behaviors of people? What will they do? And how long will it take to get out? Some of the key output we get from evacuation studies are just 3 big ones. These are the 3 things a lot of people are looking for. The storm surge maps. What does it look like? What does storm surge look for these communities? Really drill down to the street level. And then understanding those zones that need to leave by drawing and delineating evacuation zones. And then how long will it take to get those evacuation zones cleared for different scenarios? We're not talking just one time. We can have a whole matrix of times ranging from just a few hours to a few days. This can be an authoritative source for evacuation planning. But something I want to caveat here, it's not always the standard products. Because this is a study that's federally supported, our states manage it, but our locals really drive what these look like and what their needs are. They can change greatly in just a few miles in these communities, and understanding how their storm surge threat changes and what their communities look like. So the products may be different from specific evacuation scenarios to how the zones are drawn, and that method could change greatly across just a few miles, believe it or not. And I'll come to the importance of that shortly. And here's a quick example of a Gulf Coast state. The storm surge on the left here shows a varying risk through a community, some roads crisscrossing around. Very hard to visualize and see and understand who is at risk and who isn't. If you were a resident from this area, trying to pinpoint what zone you were in exactly might be a little tough. And that's where evacuation zones come into play. Local emergency managers delineate landmarks, features, roads, rivers, or other community known areas as evacuation zones. So they can say areas south of a specific interstate are zone 1, areas north of an interstate are zone 3. And this is nice. It could be easy, just pick a road and do that, but not all communities can afford to do that. By doing this, you have large areas that do not need to evacuate. So some break down even to the parcel level, almost to the building footprint of who needs to evacuate and who does not need to evacuate for specific threats. That takes a lot of coordination, a lot of science, and then trying to communicate that as a feat among itself. But something to remember that it can be done, and there's unique ways to get at that throughout the US. And just, again, it's depending on the community on how that needs to be taken care of and handled. So in the end, we do a lot of these behavioral surveys before and after hurricanes throughout the US. And some of the best researchers and behavioral scientists come to these two realizations why people evacuate. They think they're at risk, and they were told to evacuate. Pretty simple. We know there's a lot of different things that go into decision making, but those are the two key things. If you really think you're at risk from considerable harm and you're hearing the message, you're very likely to evacuate and understand you need to go. An example that a lot of folks are familiar with, a great example of evacuation's success, was Hurricane Irma. And here's Hurricane Irma just 2 days from landfall, still out in the Caribbean near Puerto Rico, heading towards Florida, the southeast United States, and a very scary storm. You know, it can be tough to communicate to people who are hundreds and hundreds of miles away from the storm. And we know there is some error and the forecast changes, but it's hard to convince people that it's time to leave when the storms are so far away sometimes. And they might not think there's a threat to them, or it's not as great as everybody thinks. And it's a dynamic forecast, always changing. It can be very hard to make folks realize that they need to take it seriously. And if you evacuate and everything's fine, it's okay. Fortunately, unfortunately, for Irma, right before this was Hurricane Harvey in the Gulf Coast. And a lot of the public saw what was happening to the flooding in Houston. Kind of different scenario going on from a slow moving rain falling event over an area, not of where it was landfalling, but they saw what a storm could do. And Harvey was one of those rapid intensifiers that made landfall in the Gulf Coast. Irma was a scary one. And I think people heed that message pretty quickly and were tuned in to hearing the message of evacuation. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few more slides. So one of the key things that we find that works is getting the word out. Those pre-season campaigns that are done nationally and the state level and locally are great. You know, we are getting more and more into the social media world with apps and websites and notifications where you can sign up and get specifically targeted messages for where you're at. We know it's out there. Also, the real-time stuff that's out there, the media and having that social media push through the emergency management agencies and private notifications. It's all out there. Not sure if it's getting to everybody, but there's a lot out there, and it's almost overwhelming of where you can get information from and who is pushing it out to everybody. Here's a great example from Pinellas County, Florida, along the Gulf Coast of Florida, near the Tampa Bay area. They had a website that you could plug in your address and you could go down and see your house and see what those evacuation zones were. And this is a case where they cannot afford to just evacuate large swaths of people. They really need to be targeted because they had limited roadway networks and a lot of people and water all around, and a storm surge threat and a risk that's pretty high too. So this is a great way for people to get out there and not only see where they are, how bad it could be, what does it mean to their home and their community, but also other information like where the local shelters were, if they were open or closed with an address, any special needs shelters for folks with medical needs, and other accommodations like hotels and the closest hotels to the area. The possibilities are endless now with some of the technology and some of these great mapping features we can do to support people's decision making. This is a great example of one way to get that out there. Unfortunately, a lot of times those efforts aren't working very well. In post-storm analysis, when surveys are conducted among the states and other areas by researchers, they find that a lot of folks still don't realize what evacuation zone they're in. And here's a quick example here that shows respondents. If you focus in on the blue bars there, those are people that are living in a Category 1 zone. So one of the most vulnerable areas, you can see their success rate of identifying. You can see most of those areas that are different regions around Florida really are hovering around that 20% mark. The best, the Southeast Florida, SE, had near 60. That means there's 40% that could not identify the correct evacuation zone they were in. So, and a lot of other folks missed their mark. So it's really hard. We've seen time and time again that people really can't pick out evacuation zones. They've been mailed letters with their maps and evacuations, and they still have trouble understanding if it applies to them or not, and any nuances. The other thing that people do is they underestimate their risk from storm surge. They think their home is safe, even when they're near water. They've never seen water get that high, and they don't think it applies to them. A lot of times they say it wasn't that bad last time, or they're focusing on the track, they're focused on the intensity of the storm, and they're not really paying attention to what the hazards are. And again, they don't know how to use a map. You can see here that a lot of folks in a Category 1 zone, I'll focus on the left side of that chart, 30% think they'd be unsafe in a Cat 2. That means 70% thought they'd be safe, and unsafe in a Cat 3 or 4, still not reaching 100%. So a lot of times we've seen in post-storm assessments that people try to look too narrowly at the intensity of the storm and too much at the track and think it applies to them and think that their home's okay. And a lot of times they think their home is safe from water, but not wind. They don't realize it's the water that's going to probably destroy their home. A summary of some of those public surveys, again, is the serious under concern about storm surge. A lot of times in these surveys, evacuation intents often overstated, but we do see that evacuation intents are highest for major hurricanes, mandatory or ordered evacuations, households with children, and people with recent real hurricane experience. A lot of people, as mentioned, a lot of times people often feel they get a false experience effect. To the right here is the evacuation orders from Hurricane Irma. You can see going up the east and west coast of Florida. At one point, we weren't sure which side it was going up. It was going to the east coast, up the middle, to the left side, or on the west coast. So orders were out for quite a bit of South Florida, and people were listening. This was one of those I mentioned successful evacuations. Millions and millions of people ordered to evacuate, millions of people on the road, a lot of people in shelters. it was a very scary scenario for a lot of folks. And as mentioned, they were just seeing some of the images from Hurricane Harvey. So the people might have already been tuned in to get to those mandatory and ordered evacuations. This was a major hurricane after another major hurricane just had made landfall. And Florida does have a lot of experience with hurricanes in the past few years. So this was one of those successful evacuations. Sometimes you wish they weren't so successful because they have that experience, but at least they listened. The good news, storm surge deaths are a lot less than other hazards lately. While storm surge has the highest potential for loss of life, recently numbers are down. We've seen that the forecast for the track and hazards are better than ever. Some of the best forecasts we've ever seen, and people are really getting confidence in that, and those watches and warnings are getting to where they need to be. Also, fortunately, some of the denser populations have been spared. Hurricanes, especially the intense ones, have gone into less populated areas, thankfully. Unfortunately, more than 50% of those deaths are water-related and vehicle-related. More than 50 of those water-related fatalities are vehicle-related. So people are in their cars driving. So you start, racking your head. Do we tell people to get in their cars to evacuate if people are actually dying in cars? So this is a tough balance. You can see on the graphic, 4% of the fatalities were from storm surge in the past few years, which we had a lot of hurricane strikes. So generally, though, the public does not understand their risk overall, and they don't think evacuation orders for them. We have some successes, but there's been some where very low rates of participation have happened. So some of the best practices for evacuations that we've come up through behavioral surveys, through sharing of information, through local emergency managers. Some of the best practices I'll go through here now. One of the big things is a strong, consistent message. And consistency among officials, that a message that makes sense and that people are echoing along the chain. And standard wording helps. When we build evacuation studies, we actually ask the local officials to write down the evacuation zones and how they would describe them, so they could think about it. What does it sound like? What does it look like? Do I have a long listing, or is it really concise and exact, and how this building being built? The other key message, best practice, is having mandatory or ordered evacuations. Really strong wording on when they start and when they're going to happen and why. Why are they being ordered? For what hazards? As strong as possible and consistent, and transparent too. If they may change, or if they're going to be ordered soon, that helps that message to be ingrained in different ways, and people can know to check back for more information. Also, communicating early and often. If you look to some of the most successful safety campaigns out there, and in the US, we have some of the safety campaigns for fire, like Stop, Drop, and Roll, and we have safety campaigns for tornadoes and earthquakes. That we're getting to the students and the young kids early about what to do in a emergency. And this could be an emergency. We're seeing this happen, and a lot of folks may be dealing with evacuating their home. So getting to the kids early is a great way to start that conversation. And also decision makers communicating early and often that are familiar with the community. It builds that trust and recognition. We can point to some great stories of successes of emergency managers that are out there pre-season in the community, and the people see them when they're in the media calling for these evacuations. They recognize this is a person that has been working with us, or working with these communities, and they trust and recognize them. We've seen it time and time again, these long-standing emergency managers that pour their whole heart and soul into it, but they get really good, successful participations in evacuations, and people listen to them. Another great best practice is phased evacuations. Start with the slowest movers and the most vulnerable, areas that have to go every time. Whether they're going to be isolated, they're going to get the majority of hazards. A lot of times they get the wind, the storm surge, the rain, those areas that you know that are just going to get it, unfortunately. But start with those areas. And also areas that are hard to evacuate, those evacuation islands, we call them, where you only may have a few roads out or a few ways to move people. They might take the longest. It could happen before or after. If you have storm surge surrounding an area, you don't want to leave people surrounded or isolated like that. So those could be phased first. And also public that is fragile and those that need assistant evacuations. A lot of time that takes a lot longer. But if you phase in those evacuations with the most vulnerable, the folks that you know are going to have to go every time, and then go to the next, it gives you a little bit of time to get that call started and then look for the next forecast if it is going to be something that you might need to pull, or you might be able to hold. A lot of times those areas that are not in the direct path can not go for the entire coastline or the entire community, but get those areas that are most vulnerable. So it gives that a little bit of flexibility in evacuations as opposed to going entire coastline, entire communities, or entire states. So phase evacuations are being thought of as a way to start the evacuations with the most vulnerable first and hopefully deal with those long clearance times. Another best practice is the knowledge transfer to successors. Many times the why is lost. The momentum on outreach can be dropped or just lost. And why were we doing this? Why were certain things being done in a community? And written plans can only go so far. You can only write down so much, but knowing some of that institutional knowledge and what makes a community unique is invaluable. That's why the Federal Emergency Management Agency is not trying to build evacuation zones or trying to determine what needs to be done at a local level. We just can't understand those specific community needs and what needs to happen to make them successful. It's so hard to do, and that's where if we can find a way to do that, it would be really key to keeping the best practice going. Another great best practice is getting everybody on the same page and plan, whether it be pre-season planning as you're writing the plans and determining what are the priorities and when things need to be done, or operational decisions. Having different levels of government be involved, the supporting partners and supporting agencies, the private sector and business partners, and also public groups, involving them early and often. This is a great example of the Hurricane Center director in the Hurricane Liaison room, a FEMA room within the Hurricane Center, communicating to Federal Emergency Management Agency and state agencies about a forecast of a storm. Everybody was hearing that same message, that getting that baseline of where the storm is, where is it going, how bad is it going to be, and asking and hearing questions and answers, and getting a solid, this is our starting point. We've seen that also some states have had a single call just to start understanding what is their 0 hour, or the hour they need to have everything done, which gets everybody on the same page of where are we headed here. Another one, which is tough to do, but it would be great if it would work, is evacuating just tens of miles, not hundreds. It's easier to plan, it's easier to host. The cost should be less for public if most of them are moving themselves. It keeps people from thinking, hey, I'm leaving my community behind, I'm close. But it can be tough due to geography and housing options. Sometimes when you get away from the coastlines, there just isn't the infrastructure to support millions of people for days on end. One of the things we try to get folks to do is go to a family member, which can work sometimes, but it's not always. And sometimes sheltering people for days on end or weeks on end could be a disaster amongst itself. It's a very hard thing to do, to take people that aren't from the area and try to house them and take care of them as a disaster is happening in the community. In summary, for some of the best practices for evacuations, having a strong, consistent message from leaders that's people can instills confidence in people that this is a people know what's going on and what's happening, and there's a plan for what to be handling a disaster. Communicating early and often, understanding when to reach the kids and when to be out in the community so that you're seen as a trusted member of the community, that you're going to be making decisions in the community's best interest. In phased evacuations, the most vulnerable and the slowest out first. If those can get out, hopefully, those can get out soon. Those could also be the most devastated. So you're dealing with areas that might not be feeling the first order effects of the storm. Also, that knowledge transfer successes. There's a way that we can keep that going, that these emergency managers aren't as burnt out and can stay with these jobs forever and ever. But have a way to keep the momentum they work on for years and years as these communities grow and thrive would be key. And having everybody on the same page and plan. It seems like that is one of the toughest things to do in a disaster, because so many people are involved, so many different levels of government, so many different agencies, and being able to do that would be one of your first priorities, probably, to making sure that it's a success. And again, if you can evacuate not too far, for many host of reasons, but that can help also repopulate and maybe keep people. In the US, we have the ability to evacuate people thousands of miles. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't come back, but if you keep them close and keep those communities thriving and important members there to keep it and rebuild those communities. With that, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity, your interest and your time. On behalf of the FEMA administrator, the regional administrator, and our division directors, we truly appreciate sharing and your interest in our agency and what we do to protect the citizens of our country. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll start the panel discussion on disaster information, warning advisory, and evacuation behaviors, adaptation to global warming. Let me introduce the facilitator, Chairperson, Deputy Disaster Reduction Alliance, DRA. Sorry, the Chairperson Executive Committee of the International Disaster Reduction Alliance Forum, DRI, Mr. Kawata. And we have panelists including H. Nakakita, Kyoto University Disaster Prevention Research Institute. And from FEMA, we have Jolene Jubela, Brandon Bolinsky, Annie Troll. Yes. And from Tokyo University Graduate School, specially appointed Professor Koshitaka Katada. From Kyoto University Research Institute of Disaster Prevention, Mr. Katsuya Yamori, and Deputy Director General for Disaster Mitigation from Japan Meteorological Agency, Mr. Yoshihisa Imata, are the members. We're not going to explain all the titles of the panelists. Please refer to the pamphlets. Now, Mr. Kawata, please go ahead and do the facilitation. Yes, nice to see you again. I'm Kawata. So this is a Japan-US panel discussion. Let's now think about how we can deepen our understanding on this really difficult challenge. Let's try to collect all the wisdom and knowledge that two countries have. As for me, well, in 2001, there was a 9/11, and I was one of the director of on-site investigation group, and I was in Washington. And there was a Hurricane Katrina in 2005, 2011, we had Hurricane Sandy, 2017 had Hurricane Harvey and Irma. We were there on site to investigate in the US. We worked with NAS, National Association of Scientists, FEMA's Hurricane Center also helped us a lot. So that was a US-Japan joint initiative to do the investigation there. So as mentioned in the keynote speech from Brandon, I do understand what he was talking about. And between Japan and US, we do have the same or common challenge. What is it? Well, I think people who are in danger do not usually evacuate. Of course, science is advancing. We know more than we did, but they don't evacuate. And then, and as Mr. Nakakita talked in the keynote speech, global warming is advancing, progressing, and then weather is going to really affect us more. It's going to be more intense. The rain, the way it rains, or for example, the size of the hurricane could be bigger and bigger. It could be different from what we have now. And our current response will not be sufficient. We are really concerned about that. So accordingly, how do we improve the way we respond? There may be some hints through these panel discussions between these two nations. So we had 2 keynote speeches. We learned a lot. And from 3 speakers today, from now, spending 10 minutes each, they will be talking about this disaster information and evacuation behavior and their thoughts about that. The first is about the disaster prevention and its education. Education can change our society. That's the theme of Mr. Katada's presentation. Yes, thank you so much. I'm Katada from Tokyo University. As mentioned, from disaster prevention education, I want to talk about my thoughts here. So first of all, Mr. Nakakita and Mr. Brandon Bolinsky, who gave us very, very important insights through the keynote speech, that we have intensified disasters and society needs to respond better, and we need to enhance the capability of the community. I think that's a challenge we're facing. As Kawata-san, Mr. Kawata said, people do not evacuate easily. They know better, but they do not act easily. How can we improve this situation? I think that's a common challenge between the US and Japan, as pointed out already. So let me share my slides now. Yes, disaster prevention education needs to be continuously conducted to change society. That's the theme. So in order to better respond to disasters, we need to change people's mindset. And then education plays a key role. And then from disaster prevention education, I want to talk about this. If we take it too narrowly, it's like, okay, you go to school, you go to classroom, and then you learn on a desk. It's too narrow a definition, but not only that, I want to think about it more broadly, because it can change the mindset of the society. People in the society can change through disaster prevention education. And inside of such society, children could be nurtured. And that means that the continuance of such education is very important. So, as Mr. Nakakita mentioned, in Japan recently, we have been breaking records in terms of the treasure rains. In discussing this issue, there are 2 things that are problematic. One is about evacuation information. Of course, JMA, Meteorological Agency, is doing their best, but it's not coming out properly, especially from the resident's perspective. The evacuation information for each resident, whether it's really required or not, is not clearly communicated. Of course, weather information is not perfect, and the administrative evacuation information is not perfect. So then people are in trouble. The evacuation system in Japan so far was based on the over-reliance on Japanese government. Like, okay, if we hear from the government, they will just specify which place to go, and we just go to that place, go to that shelter. But the shelter information amid the intensification of disasters are not coming out properly in Japan. So if we're overly dependent on the government, it doesn't make sense. We cannot handle or respond well. We need to have a proactivity from the residents' point of view to be able to evacuate and take actions appropriately. That's one point. And then proactivity is required from residents. But then some people cannot act proactively, which is shown in the lower half, people who need support in order to evacuate. Well, we talk about proactivity, be active, but some people are not proactive, like their physical strength is not enough. So we need to support them socially. So looking at Japan for the past 20 to 30 years, we have been discussing these people who need evacuation support. But then many people, like 60 to 80% of people who lose their lives are the ones who need support to evacuate. But then protecting people's lives comes first, of course. But if it cannot be done, then the society as a whole need to protect those people in need of evacuation. And then there's a basic act on disaster management, which is revised recently. So now we're trying to revisit the way we look at things. So we have preparation, advisory, and instruction for evacuation. This is a escalated level of evacuation. So if you're reliant only on the preparation for evacuation, that's not good. So we're now trying to integrate these two things like instruction and advisory. So we only have one instruction for evacuation, and people have to evacuate until the level 4 of alert. Before instructions are given, they need to make decisions to evacuate, not after. That's the point. Then, having said that, for all the people, they need a prior information. So that's why level 3 says elderly's evacuation. And level 5 in black is not exactly about evacuation information. I mean, governments have already given up in a sense. Government body cannot do the job by themselves. So government is leaving the residents up to protect their lives. So it's not only about the integration of two different messages in level 4, more about changing the overall system of the evacuation information. That's the first point. And the next point is this. Local residents have to protect themselves by themselves. This is something we take it for granted, but we have to say it again. Then we have people who need consideration that will need to be protected by the whole society. We have created the system to do that. That's the second point. And then for elderly, some people are really healthy but aged. Then we can help communities to support those people who are healthy but elderly. And we also have people who need support in order to evacuate, including those who have disabilities and who are aged with a lot of support needed. So the supporting structure is changing. So we have 2 points here. One is about proactivity really focused. Not only just relying on the government, we need to have the residents' proactivity. That's point 1. And from point 2, if we cannot have the proactivity out of the people, then what happens? This is a recent discussion topic. This means that this has not been addressed in the past. So in such a society, children were nurtured and they became adults. Then how much do they really learn at school about disaster prevention? And when they come back home, and then they see their parents not really evacuating, and then when the parents do not evacuate, there is no society of evacuation. So we need to change that society. Then we need to really have a disaster prevention education that will make a society that can evacuate. So far in Japan, like government was the only one who would be protecting, and residents were always the ones being protected. But now this system is collapsed. We have more intensification of natural disasters. Now, I mean, people used to say like, okay, government is always accused of something, or residents are always accusing. So it was a really tense relationship between the government and residents. But now we need to change or transform that kind of society to a different phase where everyone will support each other. I mean, in the middle, we have the working generations that will also, not only just support those elderly generations, because those working generations will become elderly generations in the future. So we need to make sure that those adults need to protect the elderly, and that needs to be seen by the children. So this is about a nurturing environment regarding the disaster prevention scheme. So my keyword here is like nurturing the environment. This is a very important thing for the disaster prevention education. If we just keep on doing this for 10 years, then children will become an adult, and another 10 years means they will be a parent. So everything is connected. So there will be an adult, there will be a parent. So in such a society, we need to really nurture the children. So that's why I said continuity of disaster prevention education is very important. We need to be resilient in terms of how we build up our response in the disaster response. That's why I made this title here. I know that the disaster prevention situation here in Japan, at least, is very severe, but if we can enhance our response, our society would be much better. I mean, this means that our society has to be better first. So as FEMA side mentioned, they said they've been continuously educating to win the trust of people. I do agree with what you say. So we need to really continue doing this for the next 10 years and in 20 years. And I hope that we can create a society that we're dreaming of. Seems like this is the same between Japan and the US, I believe, but that's all from me. Thank you so much. Okay, so it was mentioned that education is very, very important. I think Professor Katada has been advocating this for such a long time with this climate change. I think climate disasters will be intensified going forward. And what should we do to better respond? I think from the childhood, we need to be able to have that knowledge and apply that knowledge. Okay, that was important. So next about enlighten the residents and thinking about the torrential rains disaster with the second best approach. So Mr. Yamori, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And Mr. Kawata and the members of the executive committee, thank you very much for this opportunity. I would be very happy if I can offer the helpful significant information to you. And as introduced now, my name is Yamori, and the Professor Nakakita, who delivered the keynote lecture, and I belong to the same institute, Disaster Prevention Research Institute of Kobe University, and I specialized in psychology. So I have been researching the regional disaster prevention and disaster-related information dissemination, and I have been involved in activities with the communities. And let me share my slide with you now. Can you see the slide now? I think now you can see it on full screen version. And I'd like to give you 3 keywords. So first one is evacuation switch, and second best, which are included in the title of my talk today. And if you have time, as was raised by Professor Mr. Kawata, that the issue we face is that people do not evacuate even with the information. So about that fact, I'd like to explain using the word that karaburi, or the unnecessary attempt. So let me start with the first keyword, that is the evacuation switch. And so far, about the various torrential rains, I was directly involved with the local residents. And I have one policy myself, that is to make the investigation into the area where the disaster hit, but there is no human damage. So there is a tendency to make the investigation into the area where there are many victims, but from the viewpoint to avoid the human damage. Not only the area with the many victims, we have to look into the area where, if it was the serious hazardous or disaster, there was no damage or human damage. So in the past 5 years, in Japan, there were various disasters without the human damage. And I made the research into these cases, and I found two clear distinctive features. And these two are the two keywords for my talk, that is the evacuation switch and second best. And about the second switch, as you can see here, I'd like to give you some concrete examples. So there was the West Japan torrential rain, which caused the landslide. And even with that landslide, the 37 households, 92 people evacuated safely without causing any human damage. And when they made investigation in this area, it was felt that they, before the disaster status, that they decided they have on evacuation switch. So when they have the certain information, or when we observe the certain phenomena, they agreed to take the evacuation activities or prepare for the evacuation. So they set the standard for the trigger of the evacuation activities, and their residents themselves. So it is what was insisted by the Professor Katara, that is that residents themselves, even before the disaster, agreed to the trigger for the evacuation activities. Let me give you another example. And the evacuation switch for this case is the information. At one elderly people's home, in Akita Prefecture, which is located just near the river called Omono River, and it's a one-story building. And running from the lesson in the past disaster, they used the information about the water level of the river as a trigger for the evacuation. So when the water level reaches 3 years, the off-duty staff will be called, and when it is used 5 years, they take the certain actions. So in this way, the precise actions were set beforehand according to this level of water of the Omono River. So they agreed on the evacuation switch. And actually, the Omono River flooded. The disaster happened, but all the residents of this home safely evacuated. And based on such experiences at various places in Japan, we are trying to promote this evacuation switch with the cooperation of the local governments. For example, near to this DRI in Takarazuka City in Hyogo Prefecture, for example, together with the residents, the Mukogawa water level is observed. So, and we have a drill or exercise to monitor the water level of the Mukogawa River. And there are the cases that which close to become a disaster in this area. So in the local community or local area, the phenomena which close to the disaster is now or are now being observed. And Japanese people have the device that is a smartphone is utilized to exchange information about such activities, such phenomena. And people of this area are now recording the situation. So for example, in the left top, you can find the two rivers get together and the flow is overturned. And the backwater phenomena can be observed in their area. So people now know that with a certain amount of rainfall, they can observe this backwater phenomena. So as you can see on the left side, left top, the Kogawa, with the population of Hyogo Prefecture, with the request of the residents of this area, now the water level ruler or the gauge is now attached to the water bank. So such marker was provided by the Hyogo Prefecture. And right side, that the residents on the side of the big water reservoir, they installed a monitor to observe the water level of the reservoir. So the first one is that the evacuation switch is now being set by the residents of the area. That is really, it is essential to promote the evacuation activities proactively taken by the residents. And next keyword is second best. And this is against the best activities. And let me give you the examples about this second best. So when in case of the flood or landslide, even with the flood and landslide, there are the cases that there was no human damage. And by investigating into them, I found the second best concept. And what I'd like to show you is the case in the Kyoto Prefecture. I'm running out of time, so let me touch upon only the points. So this is the mountainous area with rivers, and there is almost no place which is called safe on the hazard map. So the evacuation center designated by the local government does not exist in this area. So the residents have to walk about 90 minutes or drive 15 minutes to reach the evacuation center designated by the local government. But there are cases that they cannot go to or reach that evacuation centers. So what the residents can do? So Japanese people tended to take the first score, the perfect evacuation measure or evacuation drills. But when you look into the past cases, in order to protect people's lives, we have to be satisfied with the score of 60 or above so we can pass the test. So how many measures we can have in our toolbox to protect our lives is more important. So I'd like to use this keyword of second best. So in addition to the best evacuation destination, we have to have the second best or third best evacuation destination. And that has to be agreed upon by the residents. And evacuation drill also has to take place to reach these second or third best evacuation destinations. And in this case, in Kyoto Prefecture, in the center top, you can find a shrine hall, which is not the officially designated evacuation center. So it is not the full score or official evacuation center, but the residents of this community agreed to evacuate to this shrine in case of emergency. And that resulted in the very smooth evacuation of all the residents of this area without causing any damage. And there are many other cases through which we can want the same thing. So in this case of Kurashiki Mabichiku torrential rain, it was found that 21 people died in the first floor of their house, which is two-story actually. So even if they had the idea to go up to the second floor, their lives could be saved. So in addition to evacuating to the best evacuation point, we have to have the exercise or drill to evacuate only to your second floor. That's a kind of action we have started. And this drill can take place in your house. So even under the pandemic, we can conduct or carry out this evacuation drill. We can keep the social distance and do this drill at our house. And I would like to give you another keyword as a third keyword, but I run out of time. So I'd like to come up to that later when I have time. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. So with the concrete examples, you've shown us your concept. So next, I'd like to invite Mr. Yoshihisa Kimata from the Japan Meteorological Agency about the measures by the Japanese government. Thank you.
Yes, Kimata speaking. Hello. Let me share my screen now. Please wait a second. Okay. I'm from Japan Meteorological Agency, Deputy Director General for Disaster Mitigation. I was in Osaka Observatory before, so I wanted to go to Osaka or Kansai area. It's unfortunate, but this opportunity is still a great one for us. So for today, I will make a presentation about the different types of information from the warning advisory and emergency warning from JMA. We have a lot of intensified weather incidents, which now shows a new environment for climate disasters. What's the mindset do we have from the JMA perspective? So that's the point or theme for my talk. I may talk a lot. It will be a lot of information, just to let you know first. So this is agenda for today's discussion. So disaster information and damage is one of the topics here. And from JMA perspective, there are three things that we've been doing. So that's what we want to talk about today. Disaster information to be translated into evacuation behavior. That's what we want to talk about to really enhance the local communities' better response. We also want to improve the accuracy of forecasting. For the past few decades, weather incidents are coming more, as already mentioned. And every year, situations are getting more intensified and intensified. As you can see in the right bottom, this is a graph that shows the Amidas data acquisition system to talk about the accumulative rainfall for the past 10 days in Japan, starting from 1982 for the span of 40 years. You see A, B, and C with arrows. A is 4 years ago. That was the West Japan torrential rain in 2018. And in 2 years ago, as you can see in Kumamoto, that's 2 years ago. And C is 3 years ago, West Japan typhoon and its rainfall. And last August, we even broke the record in terms of the rainfall. So we see a different pattern of how it rains through chronological order. So I think Professor Nakakita has already reported this, so I'm not going to get into details, but global warming will affect us more and more, and rainfall, its strength and its amount will be more, and typhoons will be intensified as well going forward. This means that our response to disasters will be more difficult. That's what this page shows. And here we have governmental disaster response meetings and their roles. For us at JMA, we make response to disasters, and this is placed as one of the most important roles to fill. From JMA, we give out the disaster information based on which government decides on what to do as a decision. So when there is a significant disaster, then there will be a prime minister's office. Then there will be team comprised of heads from different government agencies and ministries. I am one of such members. And here, JMA thinks about the challenges about the disaster information and evacuation. So such information needs to be not only just communicated, but to be understood, to protect the people's lives, so people can really evacuate. I think that's the requirement in here. In order to do this, the imminent danger of the disaster needs to be understood very easily, and it has to be applied very easily. It needs to be announced as quickly as possible, as early as possible, so people can respond better. And it needs to be accurately handled, and the information must be trustable, reliable. When you use our information, the local government, the local community can enhance their disaster response, which is another challenge. So from here, we have each challenge as well as their initiatives taken. So simple and easy to understand announcement, that's very important. And in 2018, July, we had the system of alert systems, alert information. So we make decisions on this evacuation information so that residents can proactively evacuate. And we also announce on the situation of the disaster. And JMA issues information which is circled in red. When they see it, it's really complicated, as you can see here in this slide as well. It's not easy to understand. Then, when the imminent emergency comes, then we need to be able to gradually tell or issue information so that residents can take actions. So we'll show them through different grades with the unification of color coding, what we're doing. And then here, the meaning of each information is given here. For example, alert level 4, which is the second from the top. This means that local governments needs to give the instruction to evacuate when it's level 4. And then the residents will be informed of possible instruction to evacuate. So they'll be told to check the information. Even though level 4 is not there, they need to make their own judgment to be able to evacuate if need be. And also, JMA gives torrential rain or flooding or mudslides information. And the warning and advisory were issued. It was like XMM out of an hour or 3 hours range. So that was the rainfall-based issuance of information. But now we look at the mudslide as well as water flooding and other disasters which are considered to create indexes based on the danger of disasters. So we're doing this translation between the two indicators. So this is a risk distribution map. This is called a kikikuru, which means risk is coming, danger is coming. So as you can see, we are also getting the support from the private companies so that we can issue information to the homes to let them know that the danger is coming in a more direct way through different services, as you can see at the bottom half of this picture. So this is an alert level that needs to be understood correctly and used correctly so that people can protect their lives. So alert level 5 is the highest. It's really imminent. Anything could happen. So please don't wait for 5. We're saying, like, even though it's 4 or 3, please make sure to evacuate as quickly as possible. That's what we're saying. So that's the understanding we're seeking from the PR point of view. Next. As early as possible, we need to announce information. So that was back in 1989. So there was a typhoon that landed on the Izu Peninsula. So 3 days prior to that, they had a really unexpected press conference, which was really quick. and then they emitted information about the possible danger. JMA making a press conference implies that something is going to come. So that's a kind of switch on moment if we do the press conference. So we had that measure taken. And this is made because of the better accuracy of forecasting the typhoons, which I'll be detailing more later on. As you can see here, as early as possible, we want them to be aware of what's happening. So chronologically, people can take actions to evacuate through different timelines, and we can turn the switch on as early as possible. That's what I'm trying to say. Next, we want to have the local communities better capability to respond to disasters, which is very important. Once the information comes out, it's not the end, it's just the beginning. So the local community needs to have a better capability to respond. Only after that can we start to use information more effectively. So prefectures and cities and other municipalities need to work with us so that the local government's disaster response can be better enhanced. That's what we're trying to do. So from municipalities, information will be given to the residents who will be evacuating then. That is a system we have to run, in my opinion. So in observatory nationwide, we have been trying to establish face-to-face relationship from the peacetime so we can understand the characteristic properties of local communities. And then when emergency happens, we can utilize this face-to-face communication to really share how imminent the risk is and how we can get the information from the observatory. And that's the team we call it JATT or JET, that is dispatched to do the on-site rescue activity. And after the disaster is over, we work with the municipalities by having a review session to understand and improve on what we can do better next time. So that's a cycle we're trying to really run and circulate. That's our focus in here. And here we have responsible teams that will build relationships with other entities. And even in the peacetime, they can simulate on any emergency through workshops. And information could be better utilized through such workshops. So this one shows the August response situation. Yeah, this is back in August last year. And this one is a disaster information that uses satellite and radars to understand what's going on right now. From there, we use supercomputers to do the numerical situation simulation to predict the future. Only with that can we come up with this kind of information. So technical innovation is needed in order to save people's lives and improve the weather forecast and its operations. Regarding the typhoons forecast accuracy, it says like one day after, 2 days later on, we have predictions that have errors, but the errors are getting minimized and minimized. For the past 30 years, the path of typhoons and its error started to be halved. And the circle for the forecast have been now made into half the size regarding the size of the error. So as I talked about the evacuation orders and advisories, we have been able to do all of this based on the technological innovation in its accuracy. Next. Now, JMA has this imminent challenge for trying to focus on the improving the accuracy for a linear rain band. Let me talk about this now. As Professor Nakakita talked about the torrential rain in Kyoto, once this happens, then cumulonimbus clouds will add up, and then for several hours, these clouds will stay there and keep on raining. And some of the major damages were caused by this linear rain band. 2 years ago, in July, we had this incident. And that was a forecast in the left-hand side 15 hours prior. And then the actual situation is shown in the middle at the bottom. So even though we were able to forecast that, we still have really localized rainfall, which is something but we have not been able to accurately forecast yet. This is difficult to forecast better, but then let's face it, let's confront it and improve our accuracy of the technology so we can mitigate the damage to be incurred. From each different field, we want to get the support, and JMA will be able to better response to the challenges. And for example, this is the information that we started to utilize since last year. So a linear rain bed is really hard to be forecast. It's not something like you can do in a day. So we give information for heads up that was started back in 17th of July, and we use radars to detect the occurrence of the rain band. And then the torrential rain is more likely to happen. And then people need to evacuate. And then we just begin to see like, okay, rain band is coming and coming, and the rain is continuing in a localized area. So that's a situation we're trying to announce and tell the residents. So this is really dangerous. So rain band, this is a kind of a keyword that people in Japan are increasingly aware of. We use this term to make sure that people are able to evacuate and feel the need to evacuate. Next. This is about the future. Well, it's really hard to predict this, but this linear rain band, the forecast is difficult, but we have the water evaporation and their distribution as well as its current needs to be understood very, very well. We have new forecasting technology so that we can reinforce our technology further. We can utilize the oceanic observation or atmospheric observation as well as satellites. So we want to use radars as well to better observe and reinforce such technology, get the data required, and then accelerate the improvement of the accuracy of forecast. So that's how we are trying to train the supercomputer to enhance their calculation method, calculation capability. We also use the supercomputer called Fugaku, and this is how we're trying to drastically improve. And the R&D required for that is being worked upon not only by GMA, but also the universities and other entities in here. So through such a reinforcement, we've been able to give information related to a linear rain band, but maybe next year, we'll be able to take a step further. For example, we can say like, okay, around the northern part of this prefecture in a really broad range, like we'll be giving information about the torrential rain. But then we can just at least say from 12 hours prior that there is a possibility for the torrential rain. And then after that, we started to narrow down the area in question. And then even before, right before the torrential rain comes, like 30 minutes prior, then we can still give the information required so that people can start to be ready. So that's how we are trying to improve continuously. And that's the plan. And then experts have given us a lot of input already, and we are trying to improve the way we communicate. I'm sorry, I'm running out of time, I know. I apologize, but lastly but not least, let me talk about this. It's about back in 2013, at the end of August, when we started using the emergency warning. One, we need to work better with the local communities. Two, we need to have better awareness about the disaster prevention, including its education. We need to have the warning and advisory and emergency warning that are integrally used so that people are able to take actions as quickly as possible. So without the collaboration between all the stakeholders, information is useless. So we need to really make sure that we still have the same mindset of trying to collaborate with other people to better respond. We need to not only communicate the information, but also to be understood to protect the people's lives. That's why we are here as JMA from the weather forecasting perspective, and that's the mission we have. Sorry, that speech was really long, right? But that's all from myself. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you very much. And yes, we have heard three speakers making presentations. Okay, so in Washington, I think it's midnight, right? And then, yeah, well, so Jolie, can you hear us, by the way? So Jolie, I want to ask you this. Like, we have three Japan's experts in here. They explain everything so rationally, in a sense. Maybe you can give us a really short comment about what you heard about that. Is that okay?
Yes, I think a lot of that was on point. Definitely during education, we have programs in our preparedness offices that do that go out to schools and give preparation training to the kids there, earthquake training, and I believe some hurricane training as well, and fire prevention, those kind of things. And those programs have been fairly successful. Those kids do take it back to their parents, as well as the, I liked what Dr. Yamori said about the second best. When we have a hurricane, a lot of times, communication systems go out, roads are blocked, and those identified shelter sites are no longer viable options. So knowing the secondary place that you can go, whether or not you can shelter in place, is very important. And it's very important to make sure that the law enforcement and the fire responders also know where to go if the identified evacuation spot is not available. That's where exercises come in. If you're exercising your local responders with the community gets to know the local responders, and they can all start talking about evacuation procedures and options when the primary sites are not available. Also with exercises with the residents, my time with the Red Cross while I was doing mass care feeding, we'd go into the neighborhoods, and a lot of times it was the residents who were telling us that there were people in their houses that would not come out, but they needed food. So in the smaller communities, you had a lot of that, but in the bigger urban communities, you didn't have as many people that were aware of those people that could not get out of their homes or could not evacuate. So exercises also kind of alerts residents or citizens to those residents in their community that may need help in the event of an incident.
Thank you very much, Jolene-san. So Mandy Toro-san, Mr. Toro, do you have any additional comment?
I definitely think there are similarities in my mindset, which is refreshing and very important, quite frankly. I think that the education piece of this, taking it down to the lowest level in the community is in fact going to be the most important thing. We have as Jolie mentioned, we have our campaign, we have programs that are available for many, whether they're at the local level, state level, just across the country. I think the most important thing is that we break that information down, sort of, by those vulnerable populations, by those individuals, whether it's seniors, individuals with disabilities, the children, and we are encouraging people to take personal responsibility, make a plan well ahead of any incident or natural disaster that they may face in their community. I think that if we create the sense of urgency, we can better prepare our citizens to take that personal responsibility. And there are programs down in neighborhoods, like neighbors helping neighbors. states to train those citizens and develop programs at the lowest level where they train each other and they can provide that assistance immediately following a disaster because we are encouraging individuals to be self-sustainable for 72 hours post-incident. So in order to do that, there needs to be a big push for education to ensure that they understand what is responsible of them in those first 72 hours. So I did hear a lot of the similarities, whether it be about preparedness, whether it be about evacuation behaviors. I know that the emergency warnings and advisories are extremely important. I know that here in the U.S., we have the integrated public alert warning system, IPAWS, and that was actually put in place by executive order. And it is an alert warning system that can be used at many levels to inform the general public using different media, whether different forms of technology, whether it be phones or internet, to be able to send alerts and warnings out far and wide. And so there is quite a bit of interest at many levels, and at local level and state level to utilize that type of system, get the word out as quickly as possible.
Thank you very much. We have 20 minutes left for this forum. So I would like to talk about some focused points. So between Japan and the US, the biggest difference I found is that Japan is the very much aged society. So the information is being provided, and that information is very scientific one. And the benefits of such scientific information is not enjoyed or does not reach the elderly people in Japan, because not many elderly people in Japan have the smartphones. They still use the old version mobile phones. So the main for them to get information is television. So the elderly people watch the weather program on TV. So they cannot take that issue on TV program as their own issue because the information through TV is through the mass media. So that information to reach the many people and not for the specific individuals. So especially when the typhoon is approaching or when the torrential rain is expected, the information does not reach each individual, including the people in need of support for evacuation. So Professor Nakakita, at your Disaster Prevention Research Institute, you are studying the various things, but the result of such studies or researches have to be utilized on an individual resident level. So how to share the result of fruit of the academic research is an issue. Yes, that's the point we, the Disaster Prevention Research Institute, is not working on. So we have Yamori-san from the institute be with us today, and we have been trying to come up with a method how to utilize the result of the research from our institute in the kind of a cross-border way. So when these things are happening on a real-time basis and the people have to evacuate, and how to deliver information, including the scientific one, to the elderly people is an issue. And the same thing can be said about the climate change. So about the climate change, the information will be delivered to each individual, And as was mentioned, there will be a change in a timing or destination of evacuation from now. So we have to pay attention to that change taking place according to the time. And so I think that is a very important issue for us. So including the global warming, we have to place importance on such issues in making the researches at our institute. Professor Emory? So you mentioned the evacuation switch, and I can fully understand that concept. But I think there are so many subjects to that concept. And it's nice to have the case study, but when you try to expand it to comprehend everyone, I think we need millions of professors from universities. So we have to have the residents, each resident to learn. And I understand that you are making great effort. But when you try to reach 100 million residents, you cannot do that by yourself alone. So you have to go through media to reach more people. Then when the information is delivered through TV programs, especially to the elderly without smartphones. And it is usually the elderly and the people who are in need of the support for evacuation gets victimized in disaster. And these people are also the weak people in getting information. So how to do with these people? It's not the issue which can be solved by the education alone.
Yes, Mr. Kawata, thank you for that question. I cannot give you one perfect answer, but there are two perspectives that I can give you as an answer to your question. The first one is that, well, I was looking at NHK, Japan's TV program, Yahoo, as well as MLIT Ministry. This is an initiative called Nigenakya Call, like you gotta escape call. Like you go to internet and you get information, but that happens for people who are living in Tokyo and the children who are living in Tokyo. And okay, there is a caution information in a mountainous area about the landslide, and then they're living in Tokyo, but they call their parents living in that mountainous area to let them know the danger. So what I mean is that we cannot really reach those elderlies through smartphones. I think that's what Mr. Kawata mentioned. And then we can also utilize the children's abilities to make phone calls to those elderlies. I think that's how we can do the roundabout. Um, of course, high-tech information is important, but not only that, first we get that information with the high-tech or smartphone, but then we use the word of mouth or classic phone calls. These are the traditional means of communication that we have to utilize. I think that's a very, very important point to make. Yeah, sorry. You said like you're making tremendous efforts, but what I got to do? You need 1 million professors, you said. Then, yeah, Hyogo Prefecture was mentioned and introduced in the beginning. The governor talked about this, right? It's like my timeline for a disaster. Like, okay, this happens to our village, then we're going to evacuate to this place or that place when. We need to be able to decide on that really concretely. Like, of course, a Ministry of Land Transport can make a timeline. The same goes with Hyogo Prefecture, but I mean, Hyogo Prefecture is working on the overall coordination of those my timeline thing. Then that's another switch for the evacuation, which could be promoted to a wider audience, I think. Sorry, my response was quite long. Yeah, I appreciate it. So, Mr. Katada, are you there? Yes, I'm there. So, I understand your reasonings, but it only works for the children, no? What about the elderlies? What do you do to educate those elderlies? What do you do? Okay. Then, yeah, first of all, well, for elderlies, it's kind of hard to tell them like, okay, we're gonna teach them something. It's hard to communicate that. But yeah, disaster prevention, it's about people's lives. When we look at elderlies that are being involved in local engagement, the success comes by respecting people's lives. For example, okay, grandparents, they don't escape So the grandchildren say that they're not going to escape because the grandparents, sorry, grandparents, yes, grandpa, grandma says they don't escape. This kind of older generation sayings will sometimes claim people's lives because of their belief. So it's not about people's lives. So they're saying those proverbs or sayings. And what they're saying to their children and grandchildren do affect their lives. I think that's the important point about educating the elderly as educating others. We need to be having an altruism, like we need to think about others. We need to respect others in relation to understanding what we're about to solve. So Mr. Katada, sorry. So in that case, let me say this. Okay, we gotta teach something to children. We need to teach them to respect elderlies. I think that's a better education rather than telling the reasons. I mean, in the current society, sometimes elderlies are in a sense isolated. So disaster prevention is one thing. We need to respect those elderlies more as a society. Otherwise, children will not take actions. What do you think about that, Mr. Katada? Yes, I agree. And then another thing is this, if I can talk about this, well, taking actions on a daily basis means that we're raising our awareness against dangers we have. And I think social momentum is another word that I want to emphasize here. I think that's the responsibility we have. For example, as Mr. Yamori mentioned, okay, from the grandchildren, they make phone calls to the grandparents, and then grandparents will be really aware of the danger. And then we also heard from the head of the JMA about the joint press conference, right? And then, okay, JMA head is making a press conference, and then the local community head is making press conference as well. And then there is an administrative phone call. This means that there is a momentum for people to have to really evacuate because everyone else is telling that. So it's about trying to mobilize people, but it's not only about that. It's about the society that needs to have the awareness of evacuating. How do we design that society? I think that's a point of communication design that will be more and more important going forward. And then let's think about the parents, grandparents, and grandchildren kind of relationship that will also be a part of the social momentum. As mentioned already, we need to respect each other. Okay, my grandpa respects me. And then as a grandchildren, we can also respect back. I think that's the point. Yes, thank you. Mr. Kimata from JMA, are you there? Yes, I'm here. Yep, so yeah, I know JMA, you're making tremendous efforts, more than we are doing. But then those efforts are not paid off. Why? I think one of the reasons is because, well, as we see news coming out from JMA, but people are not having the awareness of the danger. Like no matter how much we tell them, they think it's someone else's problem. Like no matter how much rain falls, they still think like embankment will not be ruptured. But then no information will be effective for them. Not only from JMA, but also for other local observatories. We can say to them like, okay, if you're worried about something, resident, please give us that information. I think that kind of agreement will be required. And then individual information could be disseminated from observatory, which is a practice done by the London, the UK. For example, Thames River may be ruptured after rainfall. And then the Ministry of Environment has already registered phone numbers of the residents. And then something happens, or something is about to happen, they got phone calls from the governments. And then that's how they start to build up their embankments and air banks. So if you think no danger is coming out, then it cannot be helped, right? So the awareness is the key. So we need to be positioning ourselves as someone who needs to really get the information and apply them. So we've been talking about information provision from urban to suburban or other local areas. Of course, we need to talk about the necessity of doing this, but whether it's required or not, we need to, of course, widely disseminate information, but sometimes it's not efficient, right? What's your thought? Okay, thank you. How do we disseminate the sense of risk? I think we need to really communicate it, penetrate that into people. Like otherwise, like if we say like, okay, emergency warning or advisory, it doesn't ring their bell. So we need to really connect that to their effective actions that they can take. So our information should contribute to the disaster prevention. So that's the challenge we're facing right now. Like information sharing is not enough. We do know that. And then in order to individually respond to individuals by listening and communicating and responding, this is very difficult to do. Not only the local governments, I think going forward, rivers will be ruptured and rain roads or trains may stop, or this may happen, that may happen. We have a lot of scenarios that we can simulate with stakeholders. One of the good examples was the joint press conference. So of course, when we look at the weather abnormality alone, that's one thing, but let's think about what society may experience going forward. Let's try to have a wider perspective, right? So that as a society, we can raise the awareness of the imminent risk. I think that's the momentum we need to create. That's what we're trying to do. But on the other hand, of course, like, okay, residents may be thinking like, okay, what about my house? Is my house in danger? So we also need to get the private sector's support as well. We talked about the push notification by a private company so that people can know like, okay, what about my house? What about my house? And family members can also give information like, okay, are you okay? You're in the house, right? Are you okay? So that kind of individualistic approach, like, okay, seen from outside, it looks like really risky, but are you okay? So that's the community and communication to the community and the residents from the community. I know that it's not a like on and off easy switch. Of course, people don't move easily, but that's the presupposition we need to have in order to take actions. Maybe my comment will be off the topic, but that's my point.
Mr. Brandon, can you hear me? Mr.
Yes.
Brandon, can you hear me? Mr. Belinsky? Mr. Belinsky, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me? So, Mr. Belinsky, the issue of a hurricane in the United States, at present, NOAA uses SNS to work on the disaster prevention. I watched it in Washington myself. So that's for the individual information. When the individual information is collected, I think now it is necessary to collect individual information. So far, the weather or climate-related information was delivered from the relevant authority to the residents. But actually, we can get the exact situation through the SNS. So in the United States, SNS is used to get information about the actual situation. So what do you think of this use of SNS as FEMA?
I would like to ask a quick question back to you. The SMS, are we talking text messages or a little clarification on that term?
So SNS is a social network. So through the Twitters or emails or any, so
Yes.
residents are now contacting directly to NOAA using their social network systems.
Gotcha.
So in case of the tornadoes, they sometimes send a message to NOAA and FEMA through SNS that they are worried about the situation. And such information is now being used for analysis in the United States, but we don't have it in Japan. So if you find it very workable to use information delivered from the resident, it can be effective in Japan too. So what do you think of this use of information delivered by residents through social network?
Thank you for the clarification. I'm still catching up with that. No, very familiar with the social networks that a lot of the emergency services are using, the National Weather Service and the National Hurricane Center, with great success in sharing and getting out information, sometimes very technical information, directly from the source. And that can be really important. You can see how that can be shared, and that message can be latched onto. I think the thing that we might forget about with some of that is it's a dynamic event sometimes, and that information is changing. So to keep up with that rapid social media can be tough for folks, especially if there's different or various groups putting out that information. So I think some of the best practices we've seen has been through the National Weather Service integrated warning teams, where they do bring together media, emergency managers, social scientists, the private sector, on how to tackle and message these communications. And I think we hit on a few times about the education of the media, education of emergency managers and private sector about these messages, what they mean, and how to use those words appropriately, or those warnings appropriately, and when to use them. So I think there's something to be said about the social media that's out there as being a tool, but not the only tool.
Thank you very much for sharing your opinion. And lastly, I'd like to ask Professor Nakakita about the climate change we have been talking about. And we expect that there will be a severe climate phenomena from now. And we have to take measures beforehand or earlier. And so that we may find ourselves without any measures to take. But so when we try to do something earlier than the other, there will be a kind of risk. But universities and academia are in a position to take such a risk. And I think Disaster Prevention Research Institute of Kyoto University is now facing such situation. So how are you going to develop your activities as an academia? So I do not criticize what you have been doing so far, but what you are dealing with, the disaster is getting more severe, so it cannot go with the conventional method. So my message as a leader of the institute is the paradigm shift, and the institute which you lead, the society. So together with all the staff, we are trying to come up with the new concept or new paradigm shift. I just forgot what I was going to talk as my last message. But basically, as is shown in my conclusion, that preventative the preparation for the real-time phenomena. So Japan has to place more importance on the precautionary actions. And now the measures are taken case by case. But as researchers, I'd like to continue to disseminate this information or this message that we have to take the precautionary actions. And as you said, that we can expect that the situation will get more and more serious, and we have to explain that situation in a more understandable way to the people. And with the change of the climate, the areas which did not have the disaster so far, or which could overcome disaster without damage, may have the more serious disaster and may have the damage. So as an institute, Disaster Prevention Research Institute, we have to take a lead in bringing that change in a perspective, and measures will take. That's what I have in as a leader of the institute. Thank you very much. And I'd like to work with the people all around the world. So this field of the disaster prevention, Japan is said to be the leader of the research. So we have the responsibility to send message to the world, and not only the universities, but relevant authorities and ministries and agencies, and all the people who are involved in the disaster prevention have to have the awareness that they have the responsibility to send messages to the world. But the issue we face is very complicated and difficult, so there is no remedy for that. But the process of accumulating a single effort should be accumulated much earlier, more speedier than the speed of the climate change itself. So through this panel discussion today, we are not going to find any solution, but we would like to confirm the direction we will follow from now and make effort at each one's location. And on a regular basis, we will bring together the results of the effort in this way and think about what we can do together. That's the area we have to enter into from now, because what we face up to fighting against is a very strong enemy, so and it is very difficult to mitigate it. And another point is that we have the greater number of Asian older people in a society, so the situation it is getting more complicated. But we will never give up, and we will take measures earlier than the speed of the global warming. So we will have to take measures now. Yes, I totally agree with you. That's why we are here today. And thank you very much for your attending this panel discussion and delivering the keynote lectures. And each of you has a mission in your society. And I wish we can work in a way to bring the improvement to the society. And after this, I have to deliver the conclusion or conclusive remark. So through the panel discussion, as you hear now, we cannot reach any conclusion here. But here today, we'd like to confirm the direction of our effort. And repeatedly, we will confirm what we have done so far and the direction to follow into the future. And by agreeing on that point, I would like to conclude this panel discussion. Thank you very much for your participation. So, Mr. Kawata and all the panelists, thank you very much for your participation. Now, lastly, I would like to have the conclusive remark from the Mr. Kawata.
Yes, when we planned this originally, we were supposed to do this face-to-face, but Omicron virus has ravaged our country as well. And then there is another risk that we cannot ignore. So that's why we've been conducting this event online. So originally between US and Japan, we communicated very well actually. And then that's why we are having guest panelists from Washington. And then all the speeches made from the US is something that we do understand very well. And as you know, we have common problems. So from each country, we can work together to really resolve the issues that we are facing. And then that's the US and Japan cooperation that we've been doing. And of course, Japan will contribute by making efforts, and we can get the insight from the US to learn better and work better. I think that's the collaboration spirit that we need to have and continue to have to let more people evacuate. So I hope this insight that we're jointly creating will help us better handle the response. So we're now at Hatto Kobe. DRI is located in Hatto Kobe, which is a district that's got more than 10 institutions and facilities, all of which are involved in hosting forums like this today. So we have a world common problems, and each country has different positions, but we're trying to shoot the same problem throughout the world. For some countries, there are some serious problems, and that may be the same for other countries. And one of the examples is the climate change, climate crisis. That's affecting globally, not just one country. So that's why Japan needs to make further efforts. So I really appreciate all the people who have joined online. If you're watching us, please continue to be aware of what we're doing. And then especially global warming affects us all throughout the world. So regarding this point, let's work together and make a concerted effort to help mitigate the impact of global warming. And I understand that this was a really long event. This is a really long online meeting. So once again, thank you so much. I would like to now bring this event to a close. Okay, thank you very much. This concludes today's forum, the International Disaster Reduction Alliance Forum, DRA Forum 2022. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating.